We're still in Mark this morning, and we're looking at Mark chapter 12, and I apologize if you haven't been tracking with the story with us, but I think this is an important one. It's certainly not a Christmas story, although I always was sort of amazed, in the Christmas story that Caesar gets to be in the Christmas story. He had a key role there, in ordering that taxation. And today we're going to talk about some things that may seem at first to you a bit political, and hopefully we'll turn that thought around. But we're going to talk this morning about what belongs to God. And Jesus, remember, was in the Passover week of his life. That's where we are in Mark. And so we're probably looking at Tuesday or Wednesday of that week when the story occurred. And I'm first just going to read it to you, the passage, and then we'll talk about it. It's starting Mark chapter 12, verse 13. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. So we have people looking for sort of a gotcha moment here. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." And they brought one. And he said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. So we have two groups of people, the Pharisees and the Herodians. Let's just review for a minute who those people were. They were very political groups. The Pharisees were traditional Jewish leaders, and they thought everything should be according to Scripture. And just in case you might miss some little piece of Scripture, they'd made up lists and books and scrolls and all kinds of extra little footnotes to help you know what the Bible really said and all the extra rules there were. It was to the point that there were so many rules that you couldn't even get up in the morning or breathe without breaking several. And people felt that that was quite a burden, but the Pharisees were just glorying in that because they had written down the rules, they knew the rules, and they felt just so proud of themselves to be such great rule keepers. They actually were quite apt to say that God was who guided every behavior that they exhibited. But people who were around them would have questioned that and said, "Really? God is who made you so mean and hateful?" And it was just puzzling. And we have those situations today. Many people say that about Christians today and say, "Really? That judgmental attitude that you have comes from God?" And when we exhibit that, people say also, "I do not want to know your God or know anything about him because I don't want to be like you." Well, those were the Pharisees. They hated the Roman government. They didn't want to be told what to do in any sense of the word, and they thought they were so right, they were self-righteous. Now, usually, they hated the Herodians. The Herodians were people who were related to or affiliated with Herod, who was the governor that had been appointed over Israel by the nation of Rome. They were really, at that point, under Roman rule. And they picked someone, Herod, who had just a little tiny bit of Jewish history, a wife who was kind of Jewish, and he had a bit of a dynastic kind of right to be a ruler, but he was from Rome all the way and was profiting from Rome, and so people who were Jewish hated him. hated his rule, hated it that he was bringing practices into their temple where they worshiped that were just abhorrent to them, that they just thought, oh, you so don't get it, Herod. You're a pretender. You're not really a ruler to us. So these two groups of people usually hated each other and argued and fussed and had nothing that they agreed on. And so for them to get together in an alliance to say, this is important to us enough. Here's one thing we agree on. We hate Jesus of Nazareth, and we want to bring him down. And Jesus recognized right away when they came with their flattery, saying, oh, we know you're someone who's not just going to give us an answer that's political or that's self-seeking. We know that you don't really look to see who's asking you. You're not trying to keep up appearances. Well, those things were true about Jesus. They didn't necessarily really believe them. They were trying to give him this false sense of, we're on your side, buddy, and we're just needing an answer. And we came to you. We knew you were the only ones who could tell us. Jesus saw right through that and saw they were trying to trap him. If he'd said, no, don't pay taxes to that awful Caesar. He doesn't deserve your money. He would have been right away likely to be taken into jail. He'd be breaking the law. He'd be in trouble big time. If he said, we don't want to get in trouble, pay your taxes, then all those crowds of people who had just followed him into the city with their palm branches and throwing their coats down and calling him Messiah, they would have been mad. They would have said, well, what a turncoat. He's really all the time been supporting Rome. But Jesus anticipated their question and asked them a question. He showed that he didn't have a coin on him to show. He said, well, bring me a denarius. That was the amount of the poll tax that they were talking about. If you were a man at that time in Judea, you had to once a year pay a silver denarius to Rome, every single adult male, whether you were working, whether you were wealthy, whether you were poor. Women didn't have to pay, but it probably came out of their budget in some way if they were married. But anyway, every man had to pay a denarius. And he said, well, bring me one of those coins. And he looks at it and said what we just read, well, whose face is on this coin? Now, the face on the coin thing, we've talked about this a little bit. The face on the coin thing was a problem for the nation of Israel. And we're going to look back in Deuteronomy a second. Just there's a sort of a restating of all the law, I guess, in Deuteronomy. And in that document, remember, that God gave to Moses, the 10 Commandments, there's one of them that is a real problem with having coins with people's heads or faces stamped on them. And I'm going to pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting in verse 15. I think Dave has that for you. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. So in this second commandment that just said, don't make for yourselves any graven image, we often have taken this to mean don't make a statue or a picture for the purpose of worship or prayer or any sort of spiritual help. Don't have a little thing over here that you hold on to that reminds you of God. Don't make a picture of God. Don't make a statue of God. That's what we have thought that meant. But really, at this time, they were literalists, especially the Pharisees, and they were saying, don't put a picture on anything. It would have really sort of wiped out any Jewish artist, wouldn't it? They couldn't make a picture of anything. And they weren't talking about it just for worship. So when you took your denarius or your coin, if the coin had a face stamped on it, which is common, we have the presidents and people on our coins today. If you took that into the temple, they wouldn't take that. It would be sort of like some churches now will not take your earnings from what they consider to be illegal activities or things that are immoral. If they know that it's from that activity, they'll say, no, thank you to your money. I'm not sure we would be so ethical. I hope so. We're always broke. So anyway, but some people are really, serious about that. No, I can't take corrupt money for God's work. Well, that's how they felt about these coins. And so they'd make you exchange them for coins with no picture on the front before you could even give an offering in the temple. And so Jesus, if he'd, in his little bag he had tied to his outfit or whatever, I don't know how men carried coins, I think it was a little bag. If he'd pulled one out, he would have also gotten in trouble with all those Pharisees and all those people that he's carrying around a coin with Augustus Caesar's face on it. So he didn't do that. I don't think he was just tricking them or lying to them. On the inscription of that current coin, I've written this down because I wouldn't remember exactly, the inscription read, Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus, high priest. And that's because in Rome at that time, they had like an imperial cult. The official church was to worship the emperor. They still kept all the old, all the fun mythology people that you had in place as well. Many of the people didn't really get into emperor worship in Rome, but on this coin, they called him high priest. So in many senses, that offended the Jewish people and was just something there's no way Jesus could have defended. But if you think about it by saying, whose face is on that coin? He's saying, keep that stuff separate. That's Caesar's stuff. That's your government. That's how you earned that silver coin. That's who provided it for you. Render to Caesar what's his system, what it costs sort of to do business. There are sometimes licenses or certificates or legal things that we have to have in order to do business. If you want to build something in Hillsdale County, you have to have a building permit and you have to pay money for that. So he's saying, follow the law, give them the money that's their due, but don't mix that up with what you're doing for God. It has nothing to do with that. And the Pharisees, we know, were such legalists that they probably were just, it says that they marveled at it. They were astounded. They were just thinking, where is he coming up with this? It made sense to them. Kind of keep that a bit separate. Now, we have all kinds of issues nowadays with separation of church and state. When our nation was founded, there were so many mean, horrible things that have been done in the name of religion, not just the Christian religion, that people said, we want to keep that separate. We don't want to make a law that you have to be a certain religion, that the government, recognizes one and you have to do that, or you go to jail, or you get burned at the stake, or some horrible thing. We said, we want to keep that separate. Now people, take that almost like the Pharisees had with their legalism, and they just go on and on and on and on and say that means all kinds of things that really the people who first said, let's just keep that separate and let people make their own decision about who they want to worship. We have taken that to the point of saying, it's necessary to never have any religious activity in our government. It's necessary to just blot that right out, and you can't do anything about that in any government. If the government gives you some money or they have something to do with that activity, you can't have anything religious in that. And we bat that back and forth almost like a cat with a mouse. We're just depending on who the leadership is at the time. We go one way and we go the other way. And if it's on your side, you're like, yay, look at what they're doing. They're making me happy. When you're on the other side, yay, they're making me happy. But someone else is unhappy. That's also not what Jesus was talking about. He was saying, just kind of keep it simple. But what we often forget when we look at this story, Jesus answered with, render to Caesar what's his and render to God what's his. But we forget that question that's just inherent there. So what belongs to God? What belongs to God? What is his due? What do we automatically owe God, just as the adult males owed the denarius to the Roman government, to Caesar? What do we owe to God? And we often think, well, we don't owe him anything. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to come into this world. Why give me a bunch of rules about that? But really and truly, just inherently by being human, by being created in God's image, we owe him acknowledgement. We owe him the chance to show us that he's real. We owe him the chance to speak into our life, into our mind, and say, here I am, I really am real. Often we build such barriers and walls and complicated lives and rules, and we look at all the philosophy that there is no God. We often do not give God a whisper of a chance to even say, I'm here, I'm real, I'd like to know you. And I think that's what we owe God. I think we owe him that. We talk at this time of year about Jesus coming as a baby. Jesus' point of coming was not to give us a cute story to celebrate Christmas, or not to even talk about giving gifts. We go on and on about God gave the gift of Jesus, his son. He did, but his purpose in coming was not to give us the Christmas holiday. His purpose in coming was to die on the cross, so that we would no longer be separated from God, so that there wouldn't be the barrier of our sin, of our not meeting his standard. That barrier would be removed, and we could know God. Not as the Pharisees knew God, not as, let's see if I can keep all your rules and make you happy and maybe you'll love me and bless me, God. Not like that. To actually know God, to be able to communicate with him with our mind, to be able to be his people, that he empowers and blesses and shows how to live. And that's a simple kind of thing. You might think, really, is that all we owe God? I thought I owed him 10% of any money I earned in my whole life. I thought I owed him my firstborn son. I thought none of that stuff is true. What we owe God is just that, okay, God, I give you a chance. I'll let you show me who you are. I'll let me show you that your story is true. Part of how we do that is by reading his word. It's a thick, messy book with a lot of things that people dislike. And they say, well, what about this? This isn't there. Dwayne and I were just talking about this morning about how we appreciate authors who are just brave enough and willing to take a risk to just say what they think. And sometimes they get a little bit of it wrong. They say things we disagree with. But we both agreed that for human authors that say something that just resonates with our mind, we say, yes, that's true. You said that so well, that we don't throw the person out because they get some other things wrong. I'm not saying part of God's word is wrong, but there'll be parts of it that you will immediately connect with, that will make sense to you, and there'll be parts of it that are for later, that will not make a whole lot of sense. And if you focus on that, you'll say, no, I don't want anything to do with that. That's not what I think. But what God asks us is to start, take a baby step and say, I'm willing to hear from you, God. Show me who you are. And part of that, he shows us from his word, from reading it. Part of it, he shows us from things like sermons. Part of it, he shows us from nature. Just being out in nature and seeing yesterday morning the beauty of the snow. I woke up and just everything was kind of just frosted white, not too dark, not too heavy. It was beautiful to be able to just kind of look up to God and say, wow, nice work, and to acknowledge that we believe the Creator God had a hand in that. So today, I just ask you, as we think about Christmas, as you've taken this time, and I thank you for taking the time to honor God and to give him a hearing this morning. And as we do that, before we leave, I just ask you to open your heart to him, to sort of give him a chance to show you something he hasn't shown you before. There's part of God, the part that really kind of fronts us off and makes us think, oh, that's kind of harsh and stern, is his holiness. We don't really use that word very much. I don't think about when I meet a new person, are you a holy person? What does holy mean? And holiness is something that really is a characteristic of God, just inherent. It means that he doesn't lie, that what he says is true, that he doesn't trick people, that he doesn't hurt people, that he is someone that can be trusted. And that's hard to find in a human. We get holiness the closer that we are to God, the more willing we are to spend time with him. We look into his holiness, and it starts becoming part of our character.